Welcome to Energy and Infrastructure from Ulteig, a podcast focused on technology, innovation, policy, and funding. Our podcast discusses the hot issues facing our industry today, interviewing experts, CEOs, elected officials, and the disruptors making an impact in our industry. I'm your host, Aaron Lauinger, Market Director at Ulteig. Today's show will be a power podcast, pun intended, as we're going to talk about the power industry on some powerful topics. We have Xcel Energy in our virtual studio today with a range of topics from social justice to COVID-19 impacts to carbon-free goals by 2050. I have two guests joining the show today whom together have more combined experience leading in the energy industry than, well, let's just say if TikTok is shut down in 45 days, they're probably not going to have an impact to their daily lives. Our first guest, Doug Jaeger, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Ulteig, with 25 years leading in and around the energy and technology sectors. He also serves on the boards of CompuType Inc. in St. Paul and Qualis Power Services in Cincinnati, as well as the Great Plains Institute, a nonprofit collaborative focused on transforming the energy system to benefit the economy and environment. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Aaron.
Also joining the conversation is Michael Lamb, Senior Vice President of Transmission at Xcel Energy, where he is responsible for all aspects of Xcel Energy's current and future electric transmission system, including lines and T&D substations across 10 states. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Aaron.
Our series is focused on the impacts of COVID-19, as well as other major developments within the energy and infrastructure industry. And we'll talk about that shortly. But more importantly, here in Minneapolis, the murder of George Floyd and civil unrest is proving to be the catalyst for change across our governmental institutions. And of course, corporate organizations are leading with serious commitments to social justice and racial equity. Michael, as a Minneapolis-based utility, what actions is Xcel Energy committed to both internally and externally to its customers and communities?
Well, first of all, Aaron, I think it's important that just to state we're all struggling with the tragic death of George Floyd and the impact it has had on our hometown of Minneapolis and our broader service territory. It hasn't spared us anywhere, really. Xcel Energy has a long history of supporting a diverse and inclusive workforce and a zero tolerance policy for any form of discrimination. We engage at the start with students and interns looking to create a diverse workforce. We measure ourselves on diversity. As well, we have started to measure our culture from an inclusivity perspective, asking all of our employees how they think we do with respect to diversity and inclusion. Externally, we are very active in our community. We work in an industry that isn't going anywhere. We're embedded with our societies, with our civilizations, with our cities, with our states. So we give back a lot. And we've gone public with a number of different charitable contributions, large charitable contributions in pursuit of helping our communities recover from the tragic death of George Floyd.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's critically important. And I mean, obviously, Xcel Energy is Minneapolis-based. Ulteig has a very large print in Minnesota. So it's something that, we as an industry, even in the infrastructure world, have to understand how critical it is and the impacts that, it's just not the police, it's not just society, but it's impacting us everywhere, which, 2020 is the year that's chalking up as the year that some people want to fast forward to 21 or just forget altogether, because we also, prior to that and still relevant today, is COVID-19. So what is Xcel Energy doing to try to weather this economic storm and the impacts associated to it?
Well, another great question, Aaron, and I think it's broader than just the economics, but I'll address the economics first and foremost. We're certainly not immune to the impact. Generally speaking, across the globe, electric utilities have experienced a revenue decrease of somewhere between 5 and 15% just based on COVID-19. Thankfully, Xcel Energy is on the lower end of that, closer to 5. But in pursuit of bringing value to our customers, we've had to really look at our cost structure so that it doesn't impact our customers. So we have stepped up our continuous improvement efforts. We already had a strong continuous improvement culture, and listening to the people closest to the work, mitigating those frustrations, we've been able to offset costs to help stem that revenue degradation. Broader than the economics, the impact to our employees have been no less great than any other company. we are identified as critical essential workers. We build and maintain and operate critical infrastructure, the electric grid, and getting our employees in the field to continue their work to keep the lights on while keeping them safe has been a huge effort. And there's lots of details I could go into regarding that. Needless to say, our employees once again have stepped up to the challenge, and they've continued to do their work in the field and remotely, helping that critical infrastructure stay up and running like our customers expect and deserve.
Yeah, critical essential workers. Organizations like Ulteig and Xcel Energy are critical, obviously, to our nation's infrastructure. And it requires, as you just kind of highlighted, a hybrid of employees that are remote and employees that must be in the field. How is Xcel Energy adjusting to the quote unquote new work norm, or going to the office, or actually getting into the field where you can't isolate and you can't do that from home?
Yeah, well, in short, Aaron, I think we've proven that we can do this really well. I think a silver lining of COVID, if there is one, is that collectively, and I don't just mean Xcel Energy or Ulteig or our industry, I mean everyone, I think we've shown ourselves to be quite agile in pivoting and working from home or working outside of a formal office. So about 50% of our workforce was impacted in the sense that they had to move from an office setting, a traditional office setting, to home or some other remote location. And that has largely happened seamlessly. The technology's worked. We've continued to collaborate. Most cases, employees will say they're more productive, not less. So I think that has a lasting impact. I don't know what the back end, what comes after COVID regarding the working situation or circumstances of those typical office employees, but it's going to be significantly different than what it was before COVID. And of course, those employees who work in the field were less impacted from a sense that they continued to report to the construction site or the substations that they work in. The focus there was just how do you keep them safe? How do you change policies and practices so that they can social distance? And when they can't, what personal protective equipment are required to keep them safe, like masks? And again, we've demonstrated a lot of agility to adapt to those circumstances so that all of our employees have really, for the vast majority of them, have pivoted to the new way of working seamlessly.
You know, Michael, this, as you have collectively leaned into this and really seen your workforce lean into it together, it's also pretty amazing to see how you as a company, Xcel Energy, has stepped up your commitment to the broader community. Recently, Xcel Energy committed to a 2-to-1 corporate gift matching of employee donations. The company's already donated over $1.5 million to various relief efforts, if I've read that correctly. The net proceeds from the sale of your Mankato Energy Center have been committed to short and long-term giving, including COVID-19 relief. That's an estimated $20 million. And then in late June, I saw that you submitted a proposal to the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission to help drive Minnesota's economic recovery broadly. And that was a $3 billion commitment in proposed investments. Pretty impressive to see Xcel Energy stepping up at this level.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I'm totally biased. I started at Xcel as a student engineer and I've worked no place else. So I really appreciate hearing all of those things from a person like you, because it makes me proud. And specifically to the $3 billion investment that you just referenced, the more important part of that is the 5,000 jobs it creates, 5,000 well-paying jobs that it creates, or at least supports. Very proud to give back to our communities. As I mentioned earlier, we're not going anywhere. We're embedded with our communities and very proud to help create those kinds of jobs while pursuing clean energy policy and a clean energy future.
Michael, what kind of plans does that include as part of that package?
Well, I'll speak to the part that I know best, and that's the transmission piece. Clearly, we need more transmission infrastructure to bring significantly more clean energy resources to load. So a big chunk of the $3 billion is transmission infrastructure. On the generation side, there's a significant percentage on more solar, more wind, refurbishing existing wind to increase the output. So basically, Aaron, it's about adding clean energy generation and adding the infrastructure required to bring it to market. In addition, we can't ever forget about energy efficiency. There's a lot to still do on the customer end. So helping them realize energy efficiency, again, a form of clean energy is using less of it, is part of it. And we also have a significant percentage in there about electric vehicles. So the infrastructure required to help enable the significant growth in electric vehicles, which we believe is in the best interest of the climate. It helps with the clean energy goals.
I want to go back to the clean energy renewable component and to use your words, Michael, earlier, silver lining that came out of COVID-19. And it's about the cost or the effectiveness of renewables. And I read an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about how China during their lockdown saw a 10% load reduction across combined heat and power, while their solar was up almost 12%. It's an interesting scenario where you can have more power supply than demand. So China, for example, here gets to decide what energy generation source to use. And obviously, if you're going to choose between paying for fuel or utilizing solar, you're going to choose solar, right? You don't have to pay for the sun. This unique scenario during COVID-19 was really able to validate the value of investing in these renewables, which is part of that plan.
Yeah, and maybe just to chime in here, bringing that a little closer to home, Michael, specifically to Xcel Energy's territory, I recently saw that David Hudson, Xcel's president in Texas and New Mexico, commented on how Xcel Energy is seeing the same thing happen in Texas and New Mexico, not related to COVID, but with renewable projects coming online, adding 1,000 megawatts, resulting in reduced fuel costs, and total bills are lower than they were in 2017. In essence, the renewables are really paying for themselves, aren't they?
Yeah, you're both Aaron and you, Doug, are spot on. Renewables are broader carbon-free clean energy resources pay for themselves. What we thought would happen has indeed happened. The cost curve with all the investment in manufacturing at scale has really the cost of renewables to be extremely competitive, and in most cases, they beat traditional fossil generation. We've had a plan in place at Xcel. We call it Steel for Fuel, which gets at exactly what you're pointing to. Aaron said it best: you don't have to pay for the sun. You put in steel infrastructure, solar, wind farms, transmission infrastructure, and it pays for itself by reducing the fuel part of traditional generation. So that's worked incredibly well. Worked to the point where back in late 2018, Xcel was the first company in the United States to come forward with a very ambitious and aspirational but doable carbon-free goals, 80% reduction by 2030, and we're well on our way to achieving that, and 100% reduction by 2050. So yeah, thank you for the comments, and very much appreciate the opportunity to bring clean energy to our customer base and helping solve a major global challenge like climate change.
Your words were ambitious and aspirational, and I would say that's a real commitment towards major infrastructure investments, Michael, and it's clear that you believe a carbon-free future is attainable. We're going to need other advanced technologies to get there, and we did a podcast with SEIA, the Solar Industry Organization, where we talked about new nuclear, and new nuclear can be extremely costly, and we're still in the investment stage of utility-grade energy storage. So what's the answer to getting carbon-free by 2050?
Well, Aaron, I don't think I have an answer. I think how you said it is correct. I think we're going to need new technologies, new breakthroughs. Now, that said, I think we know what some of the potential answers are, but they're not ready for prime time yet. So you mentioned new nuclear and the cost associated with nuclear is carbon-free. It doesn't emit greenhouse gases. So it's got to be considered part of the mix, but it has to come down in cost. As well, there is an emotional hurdle with nuclear that we as a society need to deal with, need to address. Now, if you move past nuclear, you have all kinds of new storage technologies that are on the drawing board. Traditional large-scale storage lithium-ion clearly is a player. Lithium-ion technology today can't really do it economically for long periods of times, greater than 4 or 8 hours. So some breakthroughs there are required either with that specific technology or additional storage technologies. Additional fuels. One very promising one that we are experimenting with is hydrogen, and we're not the only ones. Converting hydrogen for use in electric generation using renewable energy sources when they're available is very promising and could prove to be the ticket, especially when you think of moving hydrogen through existing pipeline infrastructure.
Yeah, Michael, you kind of mentioned this, and it's a term I've heard before, which is called pan-renewables, where you're taking the solar, the wind, and coupling it with the storage because of the idea that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't blow. To you, Doug, Ulteig has been getting into more of the battery storage arena. I'm thinking about Moore's law and how quickly things evolve and change over time. When and where is that utility grade storage capability going to be for the industry, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question, Aaron. And I think Michael's answer to the question on new technologies is spot on. We don't know all the answers. It's going to take additional investment in technology, and it's going to take some breakthrough thinking. Battery storage is going to play a part, clearly. It's getting that battery storage to a level of grid scalability and efficiency that's going to really take it to the commercial markets. That said, there's a tremendous amount of investment going on right now, and there has been for the last several years. I believe within the next decade, we're certainly going to see scalable battery storage capability. I can't tell you which technology is going to win, but I do think the ability to leverage batteries as a source in the clean energy mix is around the corner. And it's something that Ulteig is spending a significant amount of its investment in understanding and equipping ourselves to provide some value in that mix. So speaking of investment and trends in battery storage, there's another opportunity here, and that's with the transportation sector. Michael, as you're aware, Ulteig is serving the transportation sector pretty aggressively as well. And electric vehicles are a bunch of batteries running around on wheels. I see that Xcel Energy has been making some investments in promoting electric vehicles across its territory. Why is it that you're promoting the adoption of electric vehicles, and how are you supporting customers who are interested in them?
Electric vehicles, we believe, are a great example of beneficial electrification. A lot of people don't realize this, but the transportation sector is the largest emitter of carbon emissions. As the electricity sector becomes more clean, electric vehicles even play a bigger part in helping drive to a carbon-free environment, helping realize carbon reduction goals or greenhouse gas goals. Just as a simple exercise in math, if there were 1 million EVs on the road, that's 4.5 million tons of CO2 that we would take out of the atmosphere. That's equivalent to almost 500,000 homes for an entire year. Just saying a little bit more of electric vehicles, Xcel Energy is very active in both Colorado and Minnesota, where we have pretty significant pilots that allow signing up for vehicles to be much more simple and easy, and a bit of flexibility in how you pay for it. Ultimately, regardless of the upfront costs of an electric vehicle versus a non-electric vehicle, fueling it is significantly less expensive. And obviously it ebbs and flows with where you live and the price of a gallon of gasoline, but it's typically half or less the cost to fuel and maintain an electric vehicle as compared to a traditional vehicle.
Great conversation, and I love it when we can bring transportation into the power sector. But let's transition to enabling policy. The transition to clean energy economy and the infrastructure investments required to get there depend on support of public policy, and we talk about public policy a lot on our podcast. It's interesting to listen to some in Congress fight the PTC and ITC. Some continue to see this as uneconomical, believing that renewable energy needs a subsidy to be feasible. And some at the state level still like to argue against incentives that support advanced technology in energy and transportation. While nobody's even talking about the subsidies that have existed for years, much less decades, across the other industries, including coal, oil, and gas. We all know them. But also, even beyond that, some are still reluctant to acknowledge that we have a real challenge with climate change. Michael, talk to us about the importance of good public policy in supporting the clean energy transition.
Public policy is absolutely critical, not just for supporting the clean energy transition, but historically it's been very important for electric utilities, given the regulated monopoly nature of our business. Public policy can really make or break us, so it's important to get it right. I think our steel for fuel strategy over the past decade or so has really proven that with the right policies, you can actually achieve goals around reliability and climate without adding cost to your customer bills. In fact, our total customer bill hasn't really changed much on average over the past several years, but we've transitioned significantly to a much cleaner resource pool. We just want to continue that. So we think of this as really, three major parts that are all really important. Promoting federal support for clean energy research, including creating effective and useful incentives for technology development. That's number one. Number two, encouraging the development and the build out of infrastructure. I mentioned earlier, not only do we need additional solar farms and wind farms, we need transmission infrastructure to bring that energy to load. And the distribution system of an electric utility also needs to change as more generation is being connected to the distribution system. So encouraging development of infrastructure, generation, transmission, and distribution is really quite important. And then the third thing is endorsing mandates, clean energy mandates, when they are consistent with strategy without jeopardizing or degrading reliability, stability, and security of the grid in any way. In fact, probably enhancing or improving that. So those are the three real things, the three pillars, if you will, of what we're focused on to help ensure we get policy right on behalf of our customers.
Going to your expertise, transmission, you mentioned the transmission infrastructure that's absolutely critical. There's a debate I've heard about. It's about high quality renewables from distant resources being more cost effective than making use of the local, lower quality, lower capacity renewable resources. So currently the idea of getting renewable energy from the Midwest or West to the East is constrained as our prime renewable states in the Midwest or West are limited or even separated by a fragmented grid. Michael, do we need more investment in highly efficient transmission and grid interconnections, or what's the answer there?
The answer is yes. We need...
That's too easy. We won't accept that.
We need more transmission infrastructure throughout our country, but specifically to the upper Midwest footprint of Xcel Energy, we need transmission to help bring low-cost, highly efficient renewable energy from the West to the East. There's clearly a need. We know how to do this. It's a matter of having the political will and the understanding of all the key stakeholders of what's needed, all aligned on common goals. Common goals specifically around keeping the cost of electricity affordable and competitive, bringing clean energy to load centers, and that results in more infrastructure needed on the transmission system.
Yeah, Michael, the interesting thing is you look at those needed investments in long-run transmission to support the expansion of renewables, low-cost renewables across the country, is that this great country of ours is divided into 50 states, and in the electric world, the United States is divided into multiple regions, regional transmission organizations. It's a difficult puzzle to solve, isn't it? The RTOs and states aren't exactly perfectly aligned when it comes to siting of transmission, when it comes to recovery of the costs needed to support the clean energy economy. Where do you see that heading from an inter-transfer capability? And how do you see this developing among the states and the regions to drive public policy that's collaborative and supportive of an expanding grid?
You're spot on. It is a complex puzzle. 50 states, different RTOs, all not perfectly aligned on what the objective is. I think there is building momentum around bringing clean energy to load. So I think the alignment of what that means in terms of transmission infrastructure specifically is closer than we think. And I think it will result in some decisions that result in significant transmission infrastructure being built out.
And here's a softball for you, Michael. How is it that the engineering industry as a whole can help advocate and support some of that common language around what's needed for investment in the grid?
Well, the engineering organizations can participate just like the construction organizations, advocate for what we want. And what we want is affordable, competitively priced, safe, secure, reliable, stable, and clean energy. If we all focus on that as the outcome, a party can disagree with maybe the clean energy part of that puzzle, but it's hard to disagree with the reliable, safe, secure, and affordable and competitive. If we advocate for those three things, or even two of the three, we're going to get to where we need to get. So advocate, be a voice, influence policymakers and other stakeholders.
Being a transportation guy, relating the transmission lines, the RTOs, to essentially interstates, which that's from the 50s. Why is there so much hesitation or enabling policymakers to get this on the agendas up in DC? What's holding this up?
Well, I guess, Aaron, change is hard. If you sort of connect the dots historically with the electric grid, if memory serves me right, the grid was labeled the greatest technological innovation of the 20th century by the National Institute of Sciences. So it's been around for a long time. So when you build something that is supposed to last 75 years or 100 years, change is hard. And we're really transforming the grid. We're not only changing out how electrons are produced, but we're also fundamentally changing how the grid operates. So I think the easy answer is change is hard, and it takes time to convince and build consensus on what is needed, especially when you put it into the context of 75-year-old assets. They're not short-term assets.
Yeah, and I'd build on that, Aaron. I would also say that the paradigm has shifted in the energy industry. Back when the grid was originally developed, thought of, and built, it was also built for a different purpose. It was built for shorter run transmission to take an energy source, oftentimes fossil fuels, to a local load center or a city nearby. And as time has moved forward, and the comments Michael is making about a clean energy future, is the clean energy sources, as you mentioned, Aaron, can be distant from the load center or the cities that they need to be served. So the interstate highway system of a transmission system that's long run across multiple states is relatively new in the history of the grid. And that requires collaboration among states who have individual siting authority, and it requires collaboration again among regional transmission organizations, and it requires influence and support at the federal level. All of that's relatively recent in the history of the grid.
I would just like to add one more thing. The conflation of the transportation industry, because that's the analogy we're using with the electric industry. Electric vehicles really bring the convergence home. So here's where you have, if you fast forward 10 years, and in a place like the Twin Cities, you have 500,000 or 1 million electric vehicles. Those are 500,000 or 1 million mobile generators that can either take energy from the grid or push energy to the grid. Talk about a paradigm shift. They're connected to the distribution system. You don't know where they are necessarily or where they're going to be. With the right technology, though, that is a huge resource that potentially could be used to balance the grid. That's just never been thought of before. It's certainly never been put in practice. People have thought about it, but it's never been put in practice. But it's in our future.
So what I've heard you guys talk about essentially in this conversation is that, as far as the grid goes, is we need an advanced grid. So to incorporate more renewables on the system and to improve resiliency, we will need this advanced grid. As part of that, Michael, what are some of the projects that Xcel Energy has underway that is working towards this so-called advanced grid or a grid of the 21st century?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. There's so many, I hesitate to even start listing them because we're very active in pilots specific to modernizing the grid, as well as experimenting with what are commonly referred to as microgrids. What's really fundamentally changing is the transmission part of the grid and the distribution part of the grid are starting to look and feel a lot alike. Except for the voltage level, there's two-way power flows and there's generation connected to both, meaningful generation connected to both. So we are actively investing dollars to significantly upgrade our distribution system so that it can operate with generation connected to it and with two-way power flows much more effectively, because we see that growing. As well as we're significantly changing the technology so that the experience of our customers are significantly enhanced. And that involves technologies on the distribution system. In addition to a series of microgrids, which just for definition's sake is a piece of the grid that can be isolated from the broad grid when circumstances dictate, there's absolute value there, especially when you consider the prevalence of local generation. So many pilots around determining how to make those safe, secure, affordable, and competitive, and yet clean. Again, back to those three major things. And then we're also very active in all kinds of battery or storage, other kinds of storage pilots. I just said, inventory wasn't available in the past. We think inventory's absolutely got to be available in the future with significant penetration of renewable energy sources, by definition dictated by what Mother Nature's doing, not what humans can do. So we need to fill in the gaps.
This has been an incredible conversation, gentlemen. Michael, to our listeners out there, if you could provide them 3 takeaways to our podcast today, what would they be?
On the electric sector, we are at the center of providing critical services, electricity, while helping solve a major global challenge, climate change. I mean, what could be more exciting than that from my perspective? So the takeaway is clearly it's an exciting time to be in this industry. We are making a difference and providing critical services. A second takeaway would be, when you think about the handful of things that are so important to providing electricity, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Affordable, competitive price, you can't forget about that. It's got to be reliable and secure. Secure being more and more important with mischievous threats out there. And it should be environmentally clean. So all 3 of those things, if you can achieve all 3 of those things, that's the home run. And then the last thing, I guess, aligns with being exciting, but it's the huge technological advancements that we're involved with to help achieve those 3 objectives. So it's not a boring old utility. It's an exciting industry that is helping solve a major global climate change by introducing technologies and innovations to how we create electricity but deliver it. So those are the 3 takeaways I'd offer, Aaron.
I would actually echo Michael's comments, and I would offer that it really is an exciting time to be in the industry. Now, I got to clarify. Michael said he started at age 19, and Aaron, earlier you said I've been in the business for 25 or 30 years. That must mean I started when I was 10. In and around the energy and technology industries. It really is an exciting time to be in this space. Like Michael said, it's solving a global problem, and focusing on a clean energy future is really a major influence on why we do what we do. Second of all, technology is going to transform the space like it did initially, but now to another level, to a whole insurmountable set of opportunities before us. But third, I would say from Ulteig's perspective, why we certainly love being in this space is it's the confluence of industries. It's the confluence of lifeline sectors. You heard Michael talk about electric vehicles and the change that can bring to the electric industry, but also the change it brings to the transportation industry. So for us, it's the opportunity to serve electricity, power, renewable energy, transportation, and water, and seeing all of those industry sectors come together to really drive global change.
Thank you for listening. Share our podcast and don't forget to subscribe to catch our next episode as our series continues to track the stimulus packages and we provide in-depth interviews with industry leaders and experts. Check us out at ulteig.com where we listen, we solve.